Thundergrunts.
Hey, welcome to Writers Blockbusters, the show where we treat the final edit of a movie like the script. I'm one of your hosts, Bob Rose. My Twitter handle is @ThunderGruntBob, and the other guys are going to introduce themselves right now.
I am Jimmy George. I am a script consultant and screenwriter. My Twitter handle is @JimmyRGeorge.
And I am Jamie Nash. I am a screenwriter. I also wrote Save the Cat Rights for TV, available on Amazon, other fine places that sell books. And my Twitter handle, and I couldn't remember it all of a sudden, @Jamie_Nash.
Your name. You couldn't remember your name.
I was like, what am I doing here? Where am I?
Well, your Zoom name is James Nash, so maybe that's the confusion there.
Yes. Don't give that away.
Is that a secret?
Yeah. You revealed my original name when I changed it for Hollywood.
I'm sorry, I'll edit it out so they can't hack you.
How dare you?
Or something. So today we're going to talk about, I feel like this is like, we haven't talked about a movie like this in a while, right? So I feel like there's a natural A24 relationship between Robert Eggers and Ari Aster, right? Like it seems like those guys are the A24 dynamic duo. And we've done 2 Ari Aster movies on the show. We haven't touched Eggers yet. We haven't done The Witch, and we didn't do Lighthouse. But we're gonna do The Northman.
The Northman.
It's our first Eggers episode. Before we get into the script, let's go around the table and say how we felt.
Jamie, you want to start?
Yeah, Jamie, you want to start? It seems like Jamie's always the first one on the chopping block.
Yeah, let's do it.
Go for it, man.
This movie made me all tingly inside. No, it's I liked it enough. I mean, I enjoyed it. So I'm an old school, like Conan the Barbarian, D&D kind of guy. And I loved, I even liked Conan the Destroyer was like a movie I liked. Sword and the Sorcerer, all these kind of cheapo. Excalibur, which is
Beastmaster.
a good one. Beastmaster I loved. I love Beastmaster. So anytime you get a half-naked guys with swords, I'm all about it. I'm checking it out. Fighting each other at volcanoes, I'm checking it out. Of course, this one had some higher-minded aspirations, which... both
it's elevated sword and sorcery.
It's elevated.
No.
I'm kidding. I'm totally joking.
This is the elevated sword and sorcery movie.
Because it takes place on the top of a mountain.
I was kidding because of the you guys know what I mean. The midsummer thing, all that stuff.
Maybe this and The Green Knight was also I never saw The Green Knight.
I haven't
seen it either.
That's on streaming.
That's probably a pretty good double feature though.
I think we should try to make that a thing. The elevated. I'm just going to start tweeting that now.
We're just going to make people angry. I was saying it as a joke, but we made people just start calling elevated things.
I don't mind making people angry. I think that's kind of fun.
So I'm going to start doing a troll show.
You little troll, Jamie.
I'm going to try.
Jamie's like 7 feet tall. I just called him little.
I have a mission to make people angry with elevated sword.
People don't know what Jamie looks like. He could be.
Yeah. I could be.
Jamie has to duck under doorways in my house. Not a joke.
We've interrupted
I'm
you too
tall.
much.
I don't fit on Zoom anymore.
Also, it's perfect because in this movie, Skarsgård is Jack, just like Jamie Nash.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So cut. It's ridiculous.
Yep. Yes. Yes. So I don't know. I'm kind of mixed on this movie. I feel like Jack Skarsgård is fun, but no.
Jack? Is that his name?
The one thing I will say for this movie, it didn't.
No, he said jacked.
Oh,
Bob is looking up. His name is
I was like,
Jack
wait, his name
Skarsgård?
is Jack Skarsgård,
I see
right?
Bob like staring at the screen. I thought his name was Alexander.
Yeah.
Well, there are several Skarsgård brothers.
there are.
There probably is
Yeah.
a Jack.
There probably is a Jack somewhere. There's a Jack.
Probably Jack is waiting in the wings to make a movie. But no, so this movie was right up my alley. I think the elevatedness of it is a mixed bag for me. Like in some ways, I think it brought something to it that made me think. And in other ways, at some point, I almost wanted it to get out of the way a little bit. But these are more my less writing concerns and more just my own entertainment value. So I'm kind of I liked it.
Curious,
I liked it.
I want to ask you both this. Have you seen his other movies?
I saw The Witch, and I really liked The Witch, and I never saw The Lighthouse.
I really would be interested in your take on The Lighthouse.
Yeah, The Lighthouse I haven't seen, but I like The Witch. The way and I'll just lead into Jamie. Did you get all your thoughts out there? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I'll start off by saying I think the Witch is fantastic. It's one of those movies that I never want to watch again because it's incredibly unpleasant. And
you don't want to live deliciously again.
I just don't gravitate toward movies where people are just like suffering for the duration. And yeah, not for me. But I think it's really well made, and like the period details ring true, all that stuff. And so here, I don't love this movie. I think it's like my taste is in clash with my, with my like love of filmmaking and my appreciation for all that goes into making a movie like this. So from a filmmaking side, I can really appreciate like just how hard this must have been to make and to pull off. And from a filmmaking side, I think it's really impressive, and I love the performances. I basically love everything about the aesthetic side of things and the score. But I have problems with the script, which is what we're here to talk about. Yeah, it's very much like
when does that happen?
Like I've said it before. Hey, everything's great except for the script. So I and we're gonna get into it as we go down the talking points, but I think some of the genre blend was unbalanced. That's part of it. I think, and I'm gonna save those feelings for when we get into the genre blend stuff. And I think some of the Eggers, and I'm gonna save the who wrote this shit for Jamie to pronounce the other writer's name.
Yeah.
But I think they're and that guy is from Iceland, and he is entrenched in that culture and understands it well. So the choice to be as true to the time period as possible and without judgment, I think plays too much in contrast with the modern cinematic morals that we like go, how we feel about a character. We've talked about many times in this show, like the things that need fixing and the rooting influencers and all that stuff. And I'm not saying they're not there, but the lack of judgment, morality wise on the culture itself, I think doesn't help the emotional resonance of the ending. So for me, those are my two big issues. I think the genre blend doesn't stick well for me. And then the morality, like the theme, the lesson that we're going to get into, I don't think lands the way that it's intending to, for me personally. So that's all.
Real quick, you talked about the filmmaking. I did watch the extras on Peacock, and one of the things I found interesting that I wouldn't have known had I not watched that was he apparently shot this all with one camera.
Wow.
No coverage, one camera. I didn't know that's something.
What?
I don't. That's what he said. He said it was the studio let me shoot everything one camera.
Wow.
So I guess I don't know what that exactly means, but I guess that means there's no coverage and he's no second unit. Just him.
And honestly, it doesn't have because I've been watching for these reasons, thinking about directing a film myself, and I always breaks me out of it. I'm always like, how many setups does this have and stuff like that? And it is a very master shot kind of film if you watch it.
It's I mean, he talks about it with such intention. Like, you know what I mean?
It's all intentional.
It's all intention.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like I hate being the guy on this show, but I fucking love this movie.
Good.
Yeah, like I mean, like I feel like whenever we do these episodes, I feel like I stand out here for saying this, but like I agree with everything you said, Jimmy. But I loved it for all those reasons because I don't want things to follow that stuff. Like we talk about, I like everything we talk about on the show, and I love those movies, obviously. But I don't want everything to be like that, and I also like something that commits so ungodly hard as this does. You know, I also feel like the immersion of this movie is incredible. I kind of sad I didn't get to see it in a darkened theater with like a bunch of strangers, like. This is the kind of thing where you actually feel like you could have been there. Like you are there, you know, like it sounds so hackish to say, but but watching, like, it's a hack review thing to say, but like watching this movie, I was like, this feels like, you know, fly on the wall of the time period type of thing more than most things, especially because of the morality stuff you brought up. Like, like it doesn't feel commercial at all.
Yeah.
In general, like it's kind of funny that it's like on Peacock and it's got all these extra features and stuff. I'm like, nobody that has Peacock enjoy this movie.
No.
Like, at all. You know.
I think this is the type of movie too that, like, despite my mixed kind of bag, it's not like any of it is in error.
No.
And it's not even like I would prescribe anything to fix it. It's not like if we talked about the recent Jurassic Park movie, which I haven't even seen. And you were like, and I was like, that movie sucked. And you were like, well, I just like big dinosaurs or whatever thing, you know. This movie's not like that at all. Like, and I think Jimmy is even reflecting the appreciation of the filmmaking techniques and the things on display. And I could totally see people loving the hell out of this movie being their favorite movie of the year. It's just one of those movies. Is it kind of, are you in the mood for this or not? You know, is this something that you need or you're striving for, or is it something that you're just like,
it's a total vision type of thing. Like, if you're not, it's okay to not be with him and what he's doing, but it's like, because of what it is, it's not flawed because it's all him. It's all Lakers. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's weird it's weird to say. It's different for this show.
Which is good.
Yeah, we could talk about Jurassic World Dominion easily, and I'm sure that would be a fun episode. Because we know exactly, I think we're going to get to it, but we know exactly what Jurassic World Dominion is aiming to do, right? And we're going to talk about what he was aiming to do, right? But first,
soon.
But first, now that I'm done gushing, Jamie, please tell us who wrote this shit and say their names.
Okay,
out loud, correctly.
Yes. Well, there is a writer-director, Robert Eggers,
right,
and then so here's how I'm going to piece this other guy. So how do you say Bjork? Is it, do you put a Y in it, or do you say it's?
I think you just said it right. I think you just said Bjork.
Tjorn.
So yeah, I think
it's Tjorn. Yeah,
I think it's Tjorn. So my initial take was it was Tjorn, but then Wikipedia put an H in front of it, like it was Sean.
Oh, Shorn.
Well, it didn't put the R in it, but just it was just like Sean. It was basically like Sean. But then I wanted to give it a weird emphasis and say
that seems weird.
Like Sean,
really?
Sean or something.
Well,
like,
if you look at the O, God, we're such dumb Americans.
We're such
white. Oh my God.
White mayonnaise people.
The O has different punctuation on it
so
in
maybe
New York than it does with Sean.
Gotcha. So I'm emphasizing the J, but not paying attention to the O, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
this guy also wrote Lamb. He's a writer.
Wikipedia has his name as basically Sean, like kind of almost rhyming with John. Like if you put the H in the front.
Okay.
But honestly, that's not how I would have done it, because the only thing I know is Bjork.
Same. I was going to do that too.
Who was in a band with Sean. By the way,
Oh, wow.
I
Okay.
looked up. They were like they're friends. They
That's
were in a
awesome.
band together.
Okay.
Bjork introduced Robert Eggers to Sean or whatever.
Wow.
So
Cool.
anyway, that's the backstory.
Cool.
And
of
course, Bjork's in the movie.
And I heard that,
Yeah.
yeah. And I read there's a lot of cool stuff. There's a lot of interviews out there, which helps with a movie like this with the writers. And, you know, I don't know if you guys heard this, but when Eggers came to him, he said no. He was like, this is not, he basically was afraid of doing justice to the story and its significance to the culture. And, you know, Eggers was basically like, well, no, I want to show the world the story that inspired Shakespeare to write Hamlet. Like, I'm going to, I want someone who knows more about it than me. And I want to get you on board so that you can help ensure that we do it justice. And so, you know, yeah. Bob is laughing.
I'm laughing because last night, I watched this movie last night, and I wanted just how pop culture soaked my mind is. The first thought that came into my head midway through the movies I was like, oh, this is just like The Lion King. And then I was like, what am I saying? Like, it's like Hamlet. You know what I mean? Because Lion King is Hamlet. Yeah. I was like, what am I even saying? But yeah, you're totally right. I didn't know that he said the Hamlet thing.
Yeah. That was the intent. So
yeah.
So so this guy cared so much about staying true to the cultural significance of the story that he was willing to turn down the offer to write it. You know, so I think that's important to the rest of the discussion. Yeah.
So, Jimmy, you sent an article to both of us to read, like, what, a week ago? I can't remember.
Yeah, a couple days ago, yeah.
Yeah, and I read it, and I said to you guys that we had to, before we started talking about the script, I wanted to read this quote.
Yeah.
As part of the discussion for the script.
Mm-hmm.
And in this article, this is Robert Eggers himself saying, I'm going to read this quote, "But my instinct is not to make entertainment. I promised them, the studio, the most entertaining Robert Eggers movie I could make."
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of subtext in that statement, right?
His intent is not to entertain. It's a weird thing to hear from a filmmaker.
It is. And I think also the second half is him even admitting, he's like, I'll make the most entertaining movie I'm capable of making. Like, he almost knows he's not going to make a cheeseburger. You know what I mean? Like, he knows I can't do that.
Right.
It's not within me, but I'm going to try my best to make it how I want while also trying to make it entertaining.
Yeah.
Like, he's admitting.
That's a tall order.
Yeah, it's a tall order. You're asking a lot of me here, but I'm spending your money. But I think that's important, right, guys? Like, we've been calling, for 4.5 years now, however long, we've been calling all the movies we talk about cheeseburgers. And only a few times have we really covered stuff that we consider not.
Yeah, anti-plot.
Anti-plot stuff, right? That's what I was kind of getting to.
Yeah, but I mean, this is it. That being said, Jamie, I think this is an arc plot movie?
This is an arc.
I mean,
Jamie,
he muted us.
Yeah, no worries. So I think I heard him talk on Marin, and it was funny because the Marin interview, which got me kind of excited about this movie, he almost made this like this is his Hollywood film in a weird sort of way. But I think part of it is the storyline is very simple in this. There's lots of things he does to kind of pull the rug out from the simplicity of it in some ways.
Yeah.
But I think overall, like if I explain this movie, if I pitch the whole thing, which I'm going to do right now for the next 15 minutes, it's a very simple movie. So we begin on no.
I mean, I already said it. It's Hamlet, Lion King. Nate, pick your pop culture.
Pick your pop culture that was inspired by this. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's extremely simple, but outside of the actual mechanics of the plot, though, the fact that it was directed and written by someone who isn't trying to do the things that we talk about on this show needs to be cited.
And like with a big exclamation point, you know, like
Yeah. That's what
not interested in being
He's not interested in those like you guys, one of you brought up Gladiator, right?
Yes.
Or even Conan. Like those movies have moments that are like audience cheer moments and you know,
by design.
And there's fun moments, there's righteous moments and everything.
And traditional moral codes.
Yeah, right. This does not, even the filmmaking of this does not work up to moments like
on purpose.
On purpose, yeah. Or because he lacks the voice to even make those moments like that.
Interesting.
You know what I mean? It's weird to talk about.
That would be not Eggers.
That would be not him. He wouldn't even understand what.
Yeah.
He not that he doesn't like those movies, but crafting your own movie is a completely different story. Yeah, but that also leads. I think that's a good place to talk about the dialogue, right? Like, we're talking about the script, and that's everything that these characters say. But also, it turns out that they had to basically rewrite it in post. Jimmy,
the entire thing.
Yeah.
So this isn't. There's an IndieWire interview out there. It's really great. Look it up. And discover it. I discovered reading this interview that it says the Northman used the Nordic past as its North Star, but after test audiences balked at the film's dense historical accuracy, Robert Eggers and Sean had to flip the script literally from start to finish in post-production. So it says they had to bring in Skarsgård, Ethan Hawke, Nicole Kidman, Anya Taylor-Joy, Willem Dafoe, Bjork, everybody. And they had to match their original mouth movements with the new dialogue for every line in the movie. Here's a quote. Yeah, in English. Here's a quote. So it was in Old Nordic. And they had historic, they had consultants helping them with this Old Nordic. So everybody on set was speaking Old Norse and they shot it in that way. And here's a quote from Eggers. He says, "You're like, okay, we've got 18 syllables. The fifth syllable has to be a T because he enunciates that T so well. Maybe we could get away with a D here, or maybe we could get away with an S." And so they literally wrote the entire, and I just watched it again right before we recorded, and I can't believe it. Like, they matched it so well. Holy shit.
I learned this because of you before I watched it. So I was paying attention to their mouth way more than I normally
blew my mind. So, we've talked about in many episodes that sometimes, a problem exists. They film it and then or something was fixed afterwards that you're scratching your head. Like, why did this happen? And it's like, it's that classic quote there. You make three movies, the movie you make in pre-production, the movie you make in production, and the movie you make in post. And then, so it's very interesting. And once again, a very unconventional way to make a movie.
I can't imagine. I mean, I only know that quote that you just read, but I can't imagine it's a 1-to-1 translation of meaning and stuff.
Right.
If they're trying to fit their mouth movements. So
they had to fit what they're trying to do with the story with the mouth movements of the Old Norse that was originally spoken.
This is like one of the rarest examples ever.
It's so weird.
That's crazy.
Yeah. He said they only kept the Old Norse in ritual settings and in songs. We worked with an Icelandic linguist, and he gives the name. And so he was like digging through medieval Iceland to translate his interpretation of what they were trying to do from the start, and then it all went to shit.
I mean,
I think we should start hashtag release the Sean cut.
Hell yeah!
I mean, if it had subtitles, I would totally watch that movie.
Oh, I want to watch that version.
Yeah,
I think I would really enjoy it more because because then it lends itself more to the authenticity. It's sort of like
I was saying, the immersion of it would be
the immersion,
deeper,
like my concerns with like the emotional resonance given like the lack of judgment on the morals side of things. Like,
Yeah.
I think it kind of goes away when everybody's speaking Old Norse. You know, it like, yeah.
Yeah, it would separate you enough that you could watch it. You could watch it with like a wall up almost. As an observer of history, you know, like you're
right.
Like, yeah,
that observation goes to another level of peeking in on a past time.
I wouldn't even put it past that eventually will be released because they obviously have the track, right?
Yeah, why not?
Why not do that?
Yeah.
But that brings us to we're talking about like all the things that make this movie what it is. Simple question, guys, what genre is this?
Yeah, I wanted to hear your thoughts on this. I mean, I think it's a pretty simple answer, but
do you mean what Save the Cat genre, regular genre?
Like, ooh,
yeah, that's a good question.
Jamie, actually, Jamie, you want to do the Save the Cat genre?
From Jamie, right?
No, but I think Save the
out from me.
I think the Save the Cat genre is pretty obvious. So I think that's a simple question because I do think it. I mean, I do think it's a golden fleece of sorts.
Yeah.
Because it really is.
That is for the audience.
Absolutely. So the Save the Cat genres are story patterns, and they're in Save the Cat, the original book and all the books. And they're basically like groups of story patterns that help you brainstorm ideas and kind of figure out almost like a true north for your story. Like I'm telling this type of story. Golden, the one we talk about all the time is Monster in the House, where you're trapped in a house with a monster and you're battling for survival. The one I think this movie is, there's one called A Golden Fleece, which basically you're on a road trip. It's a hero on a road trip, some kind of road trip. And sometimes they're sports movies too. So the road trip is a season of games or something. But in this case, it's a true road. There's kind of a path, a journey to be taken, a mission to be accomplished. And at the end of that road, there's some kind of thing to be, usually it's a trophy to be taken, but slaying the dragon can kind of be a trophy. And in this case, slaying somebody is the trophy, like taking the head of
accomplishing his fate is the trophy.
Accomplishing his fate. So I think most revenge movies are golden fleece movies. At least that's my take. So in that sense, I think it's that movie. What's the other genre?
Jimmy, did you mean like action?
Yeah. So basically what I meant is
it's not common.
Okay.
Let's say that.
Okay. It's the marketing genres, right? So like,
yeah.
So for me, like where this fell flat for me, and by fell flat, I mean it didn't wow me in the fantasy side. So it's basically Gladiator and Conan the Barbarian with Viking skin, right? It's like it's our premise with a new skin technique, and it's kind of three premises combined. It's Gladiator vengeance, with the historical epic, Conan the Barbarian with the fantasy epic, swords and sandals fantasy epic, and then in a Viking setting, time setting, place setting. Go ahead, Bob.
I saw some people. I was reading up on it, and I saw some people say its box office problems had to do with they didn't market the fantasy aspect, the fantasy genre aspect of this at all. Like the trailers, I don't remember the trailers that well, but apparently they were just like stark realism.
So I'm going to read another quote from him. This came from a Smithsonian article, interview with Eggers, and I kind of want to just kind of speak to that quote and why that I think that informs what you just said and what I'm going to continue to say. This is from Eggers. He said, "We worked with archaeologists and historians to recreate the minutia of the physical world while also attempting to capture without any judgment the inner world of the Viking mind, their beliefs, their mythology, their ritual life. That means that the supernatural would be realistic and mundane. It would be ordinary in this film, as it was ordinary for them." See, so for me, even though there are a lot of moments of fantasy, it's never played like the fantasy elements in Conan the Barbarian. Like it literally feels borderline mundane to them. Like he said the word ordinary. He said the word mundane magic, and mundane magic works in like mundane magic works in like Princess Bride and things where everything's magical and you're playing it. But when a movie is supposed to be historical and then you're throwing a fantasy genre on there, the fantasy elements are supposed to be played with like excitement. And I feel like the fantasy part of the genre is underutilized for me, because it's just so like
Once again, though,
so.
It's exactly his intent.
No, I know.
You know,
and for me, that's why like it never feels like Conan the Barbarian, even though I think it's trying to use that. I mean, it opens exactly the same as by the sons of law. Like, I mean, it opens exactly the same as Conan the Barbarian. I was like, wait, am I watching Conan the Barbarian right now?
I doubt he even thought about that, though.
I was waiting for the Basil score to.
I mean, like you said, the whole thing with playing it mundane, like there's no moment in this movie where the score like swells up and shows the majesty. There's no Jurassic Park moment where we first see the Brontosaurus and it's like it's true magic in the eyes of the characters. Like that's what he was trying to literally avoid.
So,
I'm not defending it. I'm just talking about it.
Well, so like to your point where the audience is, they didn't market the magic. Right. They didn't market the fantasy.
Yeah.
And I think that's because they must have known that the fantasy is not played, as magical as fantasy. Right. It's sort of just there.
Also, it's just hard to market. Like, how do you sell the fantasy that is presented like that?
Yeah. So, yeah.
But as far as where I used to manage a video store, where would this go? I could tell you that this DVD would end up in probably the action section, if not fantasy. That's where it would sit.
It would pop in the fantasy. Okay, that's good to know.
Fantasy, I think that it would probably end up action, most likely, because the way the trailers look, the cover, all that stuff. It looks like it's selling the action, and that's usually how the video store used to go. Like what does it look like it's selling?
When I think of its comparables, It is a myth. It's not a true story, even though he's grounding it. So it is a myth. It's a mythic story. I compare it to like Beowulf. So
I mean that's inspiration.
Where did now Beowulf might have a touch more fantasy, but again, the fantasy isn't portrayed like all inducing. They're just like, that's a monster. We have monsters here.
Mundane magic. Yeah.
Yeah. What's the Crichton, the 13th warrior, of course, would be a comparable.
You guys know I have a poster that hanging up in my house.
That's right. And that's directly comparable. I'd be curious
that's an adaptation of Beowulf.
So there you go.
Right.
That's right. Beowulf if it had no magic, no fantasy.
It's let me see. I was just curious what they categorize that at, because it would be kind of similar.
What at 13th Warrior? It's on action section usually.
That's what I would imagine.
Yeah.
It's because it's not historic, like something like Braveheart would end up in the historic section or something,
Video stores didn't have a history section, did they? I don't think mine did. But
no.
Documentary section.
I mean, it probably ends up Braveheart probably ends up in action.
Sure, yeah.
It's funny. Wikipedia lists 13th Warrior as historical fiction action.
Yeah, I mean that's what I think this is trying to be too.
Trying, so I would say trying, but I would say we'd put it there.
Yeah, well, and so like to it's in its favor, right? Like some of the stuff I kind of like just wrote down like some genre expectations of fantasy that it does. Like he receives a prophecy, right, from a witch. He has a meeting with a dead jester, Willem Dafoe, who gives him a message from beyond to get a magical sword. He fights a spirit king to gain a magical sword, right? And he uses supernatural spells with Olga and swordplay to defeat the guy in the end. So I mean,
also like talking messenger animals. I feel like that's kind of genre.
The
stuff,
ravens.
Right?
I mean, there's genre expectations satisfied galore, but for some reason, since they play it so mundane for me by intent, like it just doesn't land for me. It kind of feels like, why is this being played so unceremoniously?
By the end of the movie, I didn't think this, but it's so mundanely played. There's a portion of me that was like, is the fantasy even happening? Is it part of his
it's in his head. And that's the thing. What Robert Eggers is saying is it is. All of this is but they would experience it as happening.
this
but
is
in
what they
reality,
wanna
it's
see.
not.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So that balance for me, it doesn't land for me like that. Like he's basically saying, I'm going to give you Conan the Barbarian. In reality, none of this fantasy stuff is happening, but we're never really going to play with that. That's just in the background. I know as the storyteller that the Vikings believe this, but none of it was real, which is just this weird thing.
It's so odd because, like, Jamie, like you said, the comparables, like, yes, that's comparables as we see it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think Robert Eggers would say, oh, yeah, it's like Conan, it's like Gladiator. He wouldn't say that stuff. You know what I mean? Like, to him, this is something. The action is merely an act of the story he's telling. It has nothing to do with genre in any way, you know?
What's funny is this reminds me of, so back on Word Player, which is Terry Rossio and Ted Elliott's site, many, many years ago, a guy I've written a lot of screenplays with, his name's Aaron. He used to get in these fights with Terry because Terry used to write lists of like things that never work and things that work in movies. And he'd say like poker always works, but I don't know. I can't even think of what does it in regards to poker. He's like, poker works in movies. And one of the things he put was Vikings will not work. They will never work in movies.
Oh, wow.
And he was very adamant. My friend Aaron loves Vikings, right? He loves Vikings. And they used to have these debates. And even to the points, I think he used to say pirates would work, Vikings would. Pirates would work.
Is this way before Thor?
It was before Thor, but
Okay.
that's where the debates went. So my friend Aaron would say, what about Thor? And he'd go, that's a superhero movie. They're just using Viking
the
mythology.
magic is not mundane or ordinary.
And then Aaron would fight back like, well, Pirates of the Caribbean is a fantasy movie, but it has pirates in it. Yeah, it's sci-fi. And they would go back and forth. But for some reason, he believed that pirates, pure and simple, because then How to Train Your Dragon, that works. People love it. Well, that's kids animated, blah, blah, blah with the dragon and doesn't really, Anyway, it was kind of a nonsense talk. But I wish I had read up on it because I'd try to come up with Terry's argument why Vikings will never work. And I'm sure Aaron somewhere is popping in. Though honestly, Terry would probably say, well, this movie didn't make that much money for all.
I was going to say,
I'm not trying to be the Aaron in this scenario.
No. I was going to say two of my favorite movies of all time are The 13th Warrior and Eric the Viking. Both incredible flops. Like, not make money.
That's Terry's point. Terry's point for he has some mathematics that say Vikings will never make a lot of money unless you smash them with another genre.
Maybe I really like Vikings. Maybe I really like Vikings and I didn't realize.
Yeah, yes, you do, dude.
Maybe I do.
Hey, and that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, Beowulf also was like a...
Yeah, I mean, Beowulf is part of the inspiration for this, too.
But I'm saying the Robert Zemeckis one did not hit.
No, it was kind of a bomb.
Yeah, I also like that movie. Okay,
I really like that.
I have a Viking thing.
I think that Zemeckis one was kind of underappreciated. I saw it in 3D. I thought it took great advantage of the 3D. I'm a big fan of it.
Weird, yeah,
super weird. Yeah, weird. I like it.
But to keep the genre thing moving, revenge stakes. What does this mean? Help me. What is revenge stakes?
Yeah,
does this mean exactly what I would think it would mean?
Yes, no, it's a certain kind of steaks you can eat. The revenge steak. You eat your revenge steak,
well seasoned with spice.
That's right. A revenge steak is best eaten cold or something, served cold.
Right.
So in this, all movies have, or they should have. We talk about kind of story DNA. A hero has a goal. There's an obstacle in the way, and then there's some kind of stakes involved, life or death stakes that force them to act now, that force them to take agency, even though they might be, not in this case, but even though they might be lazy or kind of denying the call or something like that. The stakes are the thing that elevates the hero to take action and do something. And one of the things that I know Jimmy and I have bumped up against is revenge is kind of one of these weirder stake things. Like, it doesn't feel as life and death. It's not like if we don't take the head of the king and kill him, we're going to lose our house or something like that, or the world's going to end.
Because it's an emotional thing. Like the bride wants to kill Bill because he deserves to die, not because he has to.
I've been calling it since we've come upon this. I put a label on it, the payback clock.
Okay.
Because like if you want payback, then the clock is always feeling like it's about to run out.
Just like the movie Payback.
Yeah.
And Jimmy illustrates why this is an unusual one, because usually one of my tests for the stakes why now? Why right now? Why can't they wait a month? So Raiders of the Lost Ark, he has to go look for the Ark now because the Nazis are going to find it first. It's a race. He has to go now. If the Nazis weren't looking for it, he could be like, I'll look next year. Okay. Thanks, guys. I'll go I'm busy teaching. I got to do some stuff. I'll go next year. But in Revenge, it is one of those things that you could technically put off. I mean, Hamlet does.
Could you give this movie a little bit of an excuse, because that why now is he finds out where the person he's looking for is, right?
Yeah.
That resets the clock. Yeah.
Reset. Like he was kind of waffling until he had the information, right? And then he's
no, absolutely. I mean, that's the catalyst which sets it in motion.
Right.
But he still could say, I'll do it next season. I'll figure a plan out. That's the reason why Revenge, and this isn't a problem. Revenge is a weirder one, that there's a personal clock that's ticking.
Go ahead.
I was going to say the why now thing. Does it help when you take it in context with the story you're telling? Like in this case, these people, I mean, if you have a revenge thing in your life, everything else in your life isn't that great to begin with. Like this is it,
Yeah, it's an
why
obsession.
now is just like, I have nothing else. It's only this, like the context of it is
that's
like
historical
why now is
context.
I've got nothing else in my life.
Jamie, you actually, I feel bad because I'm gonna like hit another negative here.
Okay.
You actually reminded me of something that bothered me about the movie, which is, to your point, the clock is reset here, right? When when he gets the vision, the prophecy that he's got to, kill his uncle. And she specifies that he's going to kill him in a lake of fire, right? So she says that. She sets those specifics of the prophesized scenario. And there's two moments throughout the movie where he could kill him and he doesn't, because he's like, the prophecy says I'm supposed to kill him in a lake of fire. So the clock is still not, the sands of time are still running because the lake of fire is not here.
That was part of the accuracy stuff, right? Like
I read that. I actually read, well, maybe accuracy to the people believing that thing, but I read that Robert Eggers was just like, I wanted them to fight in a volcano, so that's why I did it.
He said that in the thing I watched.
So it's like there's literally two moments, like an hour in, and they're like, "Well, we have an hour of the movie left. We need to do. I can't kill him yet because there's no lake of fire," and that kind of bothered me because it's like you literally, he's undefended. You're standing right behind him. You have a weapon, but you're not going to kill him yet because you got to wait for that prophesized lake of fire. But to your point, Bob,
I also like him saying that to his brother or his uncle, though. I love that scene where he's like, you can't kill me. And his uncle, because once again, we're dealing with this thing where like these characters fully believe in all of this stuff.
That's true.
I got the impression that his uncle was like, oh shit, that's the prophecy.
Yeah, they did play it like that. Like, oh, you heard about a prophecy?
Yeah.
Well, damn, I guess I can't kill you yet. Yeah.
I mean, there's some of it. Eggers, I think, approaches it like he said something about like people making art for the wrong reasons, and everyone online took it as he was dunking on comic book movies, but actually he was saying like the reasons we make art is so different, and he was talking about how like people used to make art to like worship God, and now people make art to entertain, which is kind of goes with his quote, right? Like.
Yeah,
I don't think he doesn't like he views this as he was trying to uplift a culture.
Yeah, no, I know.
Else. You know what I mean? It's so weird for us to talk about like this.
But Jamie, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, not at all. And then the only other thing I'd say is one of the other ones I think we found, and there may be many more like this, but kidnapping is another weird thing. Like if you have somebody missing, it's kind of like Revenge. It's this weird kind of thing that you're obsessed with finding, and it has its own stakes, even though you could technically put it off for like a year or something.
But the stakes are always at any minute. Right?
They could be killed at any minute. That you're always looking for your opportunity to to get
What's
the
that
person
movie
back.
Ransom? You just assume the kid could be killed at any minute.
Well,
right?
and Pig was the one
Pig,
where we really
Pig.
dove into
Yeah,
this and
yeah.
kind of came up with a realization like, holy shit, like the complete lack of any reorientation about where that pig is makes you feel like it could be dead. And so there's like constant urgency. So yeah. And
to that point, this is kind of related, but this movie, it doesn't totally, I don't know. I didn't try to map it to the hero's journey, but I was thinking about the denial of the call. There really is no denial of the call in this movie, which in the Save the Cat sense, that's where the debate section usually comes about. And a lot of people get stuck on the debate section when they're writing movies like this, because they have somebody that really wants revenge. And when you offer them a chance to get revenge, they're not going to be like, nah, I got to pillage a village next week. And I'll do it later, because they're obsessed with the revenge thing. So a lot of times the denial of the call, the debate section becomes more about how do I do it? How do I plan? Am I ready to do it? So maybe there's a little plan that needs to happen. Maybe there's some geography that needs to be covered. Maybe the possibility or the opportunity is still a little questionable. And I think that's the way this one kind of handles it. He jumps into it, but we don't know if he's going to be able to show up and say, I'm a slave, take me to your leader kind of thing, until that actually happens in that sequence.
If I could call back to our why am I forgetting the name? The movie, the other Ari Aster movie,
Midsommar or Hereditary?
Hereditary. I could
the infamous
Hereditary. If anyone goes back and listens to that episode, one of the things that reminded me while watching this, and knowing I had to do this show with you guys, was there is this sense, to go kind of with what you were saying, Jimmy, of it's funny that it's a different filmmaker, but they both kind of share this duality with the company, with A24. There's a sense in this movie, just like in Hereditary, where like this was always going to happen. Like it was destined. It's just how things, it's just like, remember, because I feel like we talked about that in that episode, right? Like the storytelling itself is just like everything was always going to play out like this.
Yeah, and like Destiny is this character that's It was just, you're basically
watching something that had to happen, which is not usually.
It's sort of what we debated is coincidence. The one coincidence rule when you're telling a drama goes out the window when destiny is at play.
And this whole movie's like fake.
And you're supposed to just go with it when destiny is at play. Right. Yeah. I think you're right. Yeah, you feel the hands of fate.
It reminded
at every
me
turn.
It reminded me of us arguing about that all those years ago.
Yeah.
There's something about it,
I agree. That's very tangible here.
Yeah. And it's a matter of taste if you're willing to go with that.
If you're willing to go with the destiny.
Yeah. Denial of call and debate.
I think Jamie
covered that.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So we're on unconventional sequence.
Yeah. So there is a method we've talked about. It's basically the mini movie method. We've talked about this in the past. Raiders of the Lost Ark episode is a good one to revisit if you haven't heard it before. But one way to say, okay, I got this movie. I know what I want it to be. I know how I want it to start, and I know how I want it to end. But I'm really, really overwhelmed by how to get to that ending. To break the story down into mini movies, and they are sequences. It's the sequence approach to writing. And why I wanted to bring that up on this episode is because typically when we've tracked this, it's a pretty balanced sequence approach, which is you have like basically 10 to 15-minute sequences, and then you have your movie, right? And they all tell equally balanced stories with their own little mini plots and problems and goals that ultimately are all connected to the overall goal. Here, and they break down just like chapters in a book, just like comic issues, just like we saw in Pig. They actually show you the sequence at the front of it. They give it a label, and This one has 5 sequences, and they're all of like completely different lengths, right? Like there's the North Atlantic. The first sequence is 22 minutes, and that's basically just like a prologue, right? Like that ends with his dad being killed and him going out to sea. The second one is called The Land of Rust, and that one's 17 minutes. So right away we have like it's a big difference there. The third one is Iceland. That's where he puts himself into slavery. And Jamie, like you said, he's kind of building up and figuring out how he's going to pull off this vengeance now that he got the prophecy and followed it. And that one is 25 minutes. I mean, that one's 36 minutes. Then you have the Nightblade Feeds, which is 24 minutes. And then the last sequence, The Gates of Hell, is only 7 minutes. So I think it's a great example that, and I think it works, is what I'm saying. And I think it's a great example of how there's not one right way, right? Like this thing. And I bet if we sat here and did a Save the Cat for the sequences themselves, they'd probably track, right? They'd probably have like an opening image and a catalyst and a fun and games and a midpoint and a dark night of the soul and a removal of the shard and a 5-point finale. Each one of these sequences, I bet if you broke it down Save the Cat wise, would have their own structure. And that's kind of a really instructive way of how to get your big idea from beginning to end in a really easy way.
Would the fun and games of this movie be like the pillage scene?
Maybe.
What would the fun and games of this movie be?
I don't think the fun and games would happen in this movie until, and keep in mind, the way I define fun and games is a little different. Fun and games isn't necessarily the trailer moments or the fun and games of the thing. It's when your hero is trying to achieve the goal and there's an obstacle in the way. That's the fun and games. So for me, it's more like after he is I really didn't do this breakdown for this movie, but it's probably something more like, after he's kind of brought in as a slave for the
that whole section,
and he's plotting,
and that's the
plotting type of thing.
He's plotting because that's really what the movie is about. It's about a guy seeking revenge and kind of going undercover, if you will. So that's the fun and games of this premise.
And to your point, Jamie, that is the longest sequence in the movie. That sequence is like 12 minutes longer than any of the other sequences. It's 36 minutes. And that's where we get, him like in the game where they say he saves the prince and him,
that's where the love story.
Yeah. We get him in the cave getting the sword. All that stuff is in that sequence that you're describing.
I was going to say, to me, if I didn't break this down by Save the Cat, but there's probably something to be said, like when the love story, there's the sex at 60 idea, the midpoint, where there's this kind of victory of him claiming a bride. And then at the midpoint of the movie, he has sex with his bride, so to speak.
Fascinating.
And I think it all breaks down pretty well. I think there's an all is lost moment where he finds out that his mother was in on it. So his whole mission is a farce. I think it probably very easily breaks into a Save the Cat structure as well. Yeah.
I would agree. Even though the sequences are all off balanced, one's 12 minutes, it's got 5 sequences and one's 37 minutes, one's 7 minutes.
How innate Save the Cat kind of is for
True.
someone who's not trying to do that at all. You know what I mean?
Well, here's what's really interesting about this. And this is something that you can find in Save the Cat Rights for TV. But
available everywhere.
One of the things I get a lot about television is people be like, well, everybody knows television is a 5-act structure, a 6-act, and 2 things, and a this and that. And they give you the commercial breaks. But much like this, like let's say these title cards were the commercial breaks, that doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't break down into a 3-act structure or something like that. It just means there's commercial breaks within the 3-act structure.
Yeah, somewhere.
There's little cliffhangers within that other structure. It's not like it breaks into 3 things. You can still break it down.
Pausing a movie to take a piss. It's the same.
Yes.
It's just where it has to go, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Like when people come to me and they talk to me about the quote unquote act structure of television and the way they've read from a book from like the 1990s, I always say, that's about commercials. There's another one about storytelling, or even more than commercials. It might be another way of breaking story. I mean, there's another way to look at save the cat. And if you look at all its beats, you could say they're all acts or something if you wanted to. And then you're like in a 16 beat structure or something. But it's not really we're talking apples and oranges there.
Yep.
In some ways.
Yep. But it is interesting that I think it speaks to, the finale is 7 minutes long, and that's okay. This is a 2-hour movie here where the finale is like the smallest little part of it, but it's all it needs to be. Sometimes it doesn't have to fit. You don't have to have the end of the first act
it didn't
happen
have a sky beam.
Yeah.
And in the television book, that's the strategy I offer, is not to look at these things with specific page counts, even though I think that's instructional in film and feature film, because most movies are most spec scripts are 100 pages, so there is value to kind of guiding yourself in that way. But in television, especially when you're writing pilots, it's really that you hit all the beats and not worry. Like if you have a 20-minute setup and then a 5-minute fun and games, that's okay in television pilots. And even in some movies, as we've learned, even Jurassic Park did it one way. They had the long setup, in my opinion. And this movie has its own way. So sometimes it's more about hitting all the beats and not worrying so much about where the page counts hit.
Gotcha.
Cool. Something we've never talked about before, right?
Yes.
I'm guessing because
I thought
it says it.
Yes, something we've never talked about.
Symbolic subplots. Yeah, what is
all right, 81 episodes in, trying to keep it a little fresh somehow.
Okay.
And bring in, new lessons. So this
it's not on the bingo card.
It's not on the bingo card.
Yeah.
So there is something and there's something this movie uses. And it's a very simple technique. And it's just another deepening, to add layers of depth to your storytelling, right? And specifically visually. And that is called symbolic subplots. And it's very similar to how, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, to repetition, how you repeat a person, place, thing, or scenario to show the audience how a character is growing and changing, or, in the case of a tragedy, how they're descending, how they're declining, where you just give us the same thing and change how they're doing, basically, in relation to what we saw before. So in this case, it's with symbols, it's with objects, and basically imbuing an object. It's like a touchstone too, but it's a little different. It's basically imbuing an object with meaning, and then you bring the object back and we understand why it's meaningful, and we see how the character is relating to the object. And that basically gives us an extra layer of emotion for like how the character is either doing better or doing worse. And in this case, it's usually always worse. So an example of a good symbolic subplot recently is Ki-Woo in Parasite, the stone, the scholar stone. That like represents, the class system, and it also shows you what he's willing to do to get what he wants in that class system. And every time that stone shows up, he's descending, he's getting worse, and he's using the stone, and we feel that he's getting worse based on how he's really. You remember he's like sleeping with the stone later, homeless. So the stone is always there to help like have a deeper emotion to what Ki-Woo's experiencing. So there's 3 symbolic subplots that I saw in this movie, and that is the ravens. So we know that the ravens represent his father, right? So we know how he feels about his father. He wants to avenge him. And so every time the ravens show up, it's directly related to how he's feeling about that vengeance agenda, right? If he's sometimes he's on the path, like he's farther away, and then the ravens come and they chop him down,
recenter him,
they recenter him and focus him on the goal. So every time the ravens show up, it kind of makes us feel a deeper connection to his agenda. And the same thing with the tears. His father in the ceremony with Willem Dafoe, he's crying as a child, and the father says, "You will never shed a tear again," and says, "If you do, then you're not a man." This is his ceremony to try to bring him into manhood. And so there's this sort of cultural like stakes with crying and how he's not supposed to cry. And the movie brings back tears all over the place, like sort of challenging him to feel. And every time tears are brought on screen or mentioned or shown, we're shown how Amleth is like feeling, and we're like, we want him to like be more emotional and not be so, shoved away from emotion. And so it shows us how, once again, Amleth is growing and changing or declining whenever the tears show up. And then the third one is the tasting blood and having visions of the Tree of Kings. So every time the Tree of Kings shows up, he gets a vision. Every time he tastes blood, he gets a vision of the Tree of Kings. First, it's his father. Then later, it's himself. Then later, it's his uncle. And then when Olga gets pregnant, he tastes her blood because the wound on her neck from the knife. And that's how he sees that she's pregnant, and that he sees the Tree of Kings extended with his family line extended. And it's just another way to show the audience how he's growing and changing, and to add another layer of emotional depth. So I think if you want to use symbolic subplots, this is a great example of how to do it well. And we've never talked about it, so I figured it was worth bringing up. Do you use this, Jamie?
It depends on the project. I'd say rarely, but I can't say I've never done it. I'm trying to think of a project recently that I've done it with, but occasionally I would use it. I
mean, they show up in commercial stuff, like Batman Begins is chock full of this stuff.
Sure,
and
yeah.
I mean, there's movies are chock full of this stuff. And it's not like unique to like anti-plot or like anti-studio stuff. Like it works in any type of story you're trying to do. So yeah.
Do you find do you find like the fox or the wolf to be part of that?
Yeah, I didn't track that, but I feel like I'm sure there's like 20 of them. Yeah.
I felt like that was more like the ravens were his father and the wolf was himself.
Every time a wolf shows up, I'm sure you could track the wolf as a symbolic subplot.
His own insecurities, his own am I on the path?
It's kind of honing you into a specific part of his
psyche, right?
He's
because he's not when you don't have a character that expresses themselves very
right. And I didn't even bring that up. It's another like silent protagonist kind of thing, and he does speak, but that's a great point, Bob. Like this movie does a great job of putting window characters. Like Olga is the window, right? Olga is the window into Amleth, and Olga's main function is to talk to Amleth so we can hear how he's feeling. Right. Like. Yeah, good point.
I'm trying to think of I should know this because I teach at an art school, but I don't even think they teach this anymore. But there's a field of study, like I'm going to say it's symbiotics, that analyzes film based on its symbols and the things like that. Semiotics, maybe semiotics.
That sounds right.
Yeah, okay. I think it's semiotics. Yeah. Symbiotic sounds more like venom. It's like the study it used signs and symbols to try to interpret and try to figure out their interpretations, like try to interpret all the signs and symbols in a film or a story or something like that, or anything. And it, so that's the opposite end version of it. It's like,
that's a little bit higher level, really, to your own interpretation. Here, I feel like these things are very intentional and they're not meant to have much thought about them. You're supposed to feel immediately once you see the thing,
Right.
Yeah.
Much like how it's mundane, right? Like you just go with
it. Go with it. Yep.
Yeah, you go with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Something we've talked about several times, right?
At
this point, rule of threes, right?
Yeah, and there's a couple rule of threes in here that I think are really instructive. So I just thought, let's talk about them since, I bashed the script to this movie a little bit. So I always try to find the goods, the gold. So basically one easy way, similar to some symbolic subplots. It's hard to say. That's a tongue twister. One easy way to show the audience how your character is growing or changing, depending on whether it's a positive path or a negative path, is to use a rule of three. And that is when we repeat something it creates a pattern and it creates expectation in the audience, and it basically tells us something is important, right? So, and it's setup, repetition, reversal, and payoff. And so this one has two really good ones, and that is the decapitations. It's funny, Jamie, I almost brought it up when you were talking about the decapitation earlier. The first decapitation is Amleth watches his uncle decapitate his father, the king. Mm-hmm. So that creates instant importance to that image. The second one is Amleth's fighting the ghost king in the cave, and he decapitates the ghost king to gain the weapon to gain his fateful vengeance against his uncle. And then the third one is they pay that off and reverse it with Amleth decapitating his uncle, just like his uncle decapitated his father in the final battle. And, not before getting a fatal blow himself. But so that's a great rule of three that signifies very easily. You show the audience those three snapshots, we kind of get an idea of how Amleth's journey has gone, right? It's very simple and impactful. The second one, and this was one I really like, second viewing, I was like, oh shit, this was like really well done. I don't know if you guys noticed, but they did a rule of three with entering his mom's chambers. The very first scene where we meet him and his mom, he bursts into her chamber unannounced, and she scolds him. Like, never enter my chamber without invitation. And it doesn't feel like that's important, but that's like a big setup to like their entire relationship, all the big moments. And so the second one is Amleth sneaks into his mother's chambers and hides unannounced, just like she said never do. Right. And that's when they have their big confrontation. And she's like, yeah, I wanted your dad dead. And hey, you want to be my husband now? Which is like, oh. And then the third is, once again, in the mother's chambers, Amleth barges in, and this time his mother is the one hiding, and she is the one who's like planning the attack, and she attacks him and he kills her. So that's a great,
right?
I mean, good. You show just those three scenes, and that basically tracks the whole relationship of the movie. Begin in a nice beginning, middle, and ending, just in mother's chambers. So that's another great repetition. So that was all. I thought that was really well. That's craft stuff. You can write those things on their own. I do that a lot with subplots. I'll write a beginning scene, a middle scene, and an end scene out of the main plot line, and then I'll just pop it in so that they feel like their own little mini movies when you're watching them. And that feels very much like what they did with these. So,
yeah, I feel like that's really useful. If you're writing B stories, it's another TV trick in some ways. If you have, three parallel plots, is write out at least the beginning, middle, end, just kind of plot them out separately. Just say, beginning, it sets up this. Middle, this happens, and here's how it concludes. At least know that for these kind of things before you go into an outline or like a deeper draft.
Yeah, and we've shown that, if it takes 4 beats, that's fine. If it takes 5, but, at least if you have those 3.
Show the progression.
Yeah, show the progression. Yeah.
And usually if it has 4 or 5, it's the middle gets the extra beats. Mm-hmm. The beginning gets 1, the end gets 1, the middle gets some extra.
It's beats. Like a double bump midpoint. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Eventually we're gonna do Jaws. Eventually.
Yes.
I feel like every time praise of the killer speech comes up, we've mentioned Jaws because I think it's maybe the most famous, right?
Yeah, it's the best one. Yeah.
Yeah. What is a praise of the killer speech?
Okay, so this typically comes up in horror movies, and there's a praise of the killer speech in Bridesmaids. It doesn't matter your genre; it works. It's basically a character speaks with about how like badass your villain is, impressive, formidable your villain is, lends some gravitas to your main antagonists. And then that makes us feel a deeper connection. For instance, there are 3 praise of the killer speeches before we meet Hannibal Lecter about how formidable Hannibal Lecter is. So we meet him 15 minutes in, and all we've been hearing about for 15 minutes is how like formidable and scary this guy is. So before we've even seen him, we really have all these intense feelings about him. So with this, I thought it was really cool. It's an unconventional one, right? Like we've talked about all the unconventional things this movie does, and yet it still works. And this one, they do a praise of the killer speech for the magical sword, which maybe this is a genre expectation, and I just don't have like an encyclopedic knowledge of the fantasy genre. Maybe the magical swords are always given these speeches.
It's not just swords. Usually there's an object or something or a weapon of some sort that is, it's
so this
about what it's
fits,
capable of.
This fits the genre, but it works well. So,
even look at Kill Bill. The way they talk about the Hattori Hanzo sword.
That's it's right. Exactly like the Hattori Hanzo sword thing. So right. I'll just read it and give you an example. So Amalith says, "I seek the weapon the Norns of fate have chosen for my revenge." And Hymir the Fool says, "Hear me, forged by the deadliest warsmiths ever to crawl from the great worm's belly, a sword of the most secretive rare iron, weightless in its owner's hand, yet like a dragon's fang. Its bite can never be dulled, never broken, nor bent. Its blade can only be quenched in human blood. It is a battle flame like none other. Its name, Droigar, the undead. It is fated." I mean, you see that once he gets that sword, I mean, it holds extra weight because of that speech. Like, you take that speech out, the sword is kind of like, eh.
It's also it's
a sword.
It's unconventional in the fact that you get what you just said, but we don't get one for his uncle, really, do we?
Mm-hmm. No, we don't.
His uncle does not have a praise to kill.
Yeah, so it's sort of,
he's just sort of his asshole murdering.
Yeah,
uncle.
That's true.
That's kind of it. So you just get the sword, but not the actual killer, not the praise of the killer.
Yeah, it's interesting in that way.
Yeah.
It definitely undercuts the villainous aspects of a lot of it. Like, cuts it off at the knees, where most movies would build that up, and in this way, like, he was overthrown as the king. He's a farmer now. He keeps doing like one
That's
thing.
true. Yeah, he's not sitting on the throne in like ruling with. He's kind of a sad king.
Yes.
Yeah, to me, I guess how I would read that, if I had to, was it just more centers the movie back on the Northman himself. Like, nothing is about the uncle at all. He's just a mere plot device.
I see it as bringing the big epic myths back to reality in some ways. Like even though, and this kind of will go to what we're going to talk about soon, which is tri-theme, but even though like, even his vengeance is kind of pulled out from under him, when it's like, oh, his mother really orchestrated it, and it's like, my father was the bad guy. Oh, okay. Well, now what? Yeah, it's like the whole thing is like, see how stupid this is, or almost there's a certain aspect of that.
There's a little criticism of it
without being heavy-handed.
Yeah, I agree.
Because he doesn't examine it.
You could argue that
nobody there does.
When he kills Nicole Kidman, you could argue that he's finished killing the person responsible for his father's death.
Yes.
Really, right?
It's almost a movie that leaves us to judge. Like, nobody in that world questions these things, and then it kind of leaves us with those kind of things. Well, really, this isn't as simple as it seems. There's a lot of wiggle room.
It's plotted simple, but
it's plotted simple. Yeah. But then there's a bunch of things that kind of get undercut about it. Right. I think.
We're gonna get more into that in a minute.
Yeah. That's the big ending discussion. Nightmare fuel exercise. We've definitely talked about this.
So I wanted to bring it up in a little different way. Usually I do a prompt where it's like, I'll do anything to achieve. The first thing that I do when I'm creating a character to kind of get into the nitty gritty of who this person is ask the prompt, I'll do anything you need me to do to achieve the goal, except for the one thing you need me to do to achieve the goal, which is face my fear. And what is the answer to that question? And that's going to give you a lot of prompts for scenarios to put your character in, specifically the big one, the overall problem. But in this one, they kind of use it in another way that I also like to do. The very first thing I think you should ask yourself when you've really honed in on who your character is what is the worst thing that could happen to your character? And I would challenge you, depending on the genre, to make them experience that very thing. And if you're dealing in drama or comedy, maybe you can tweak that thing so that it fits your genre better. But, So what's the worst thing that could ever happen to Amleth?
He dies before getting his revenge. Right?
Well, even that. Well, before that, as a child, his father is murdered by his uncle in front of him. His uncle tries to have him killed. His mother is forced to make.
Okay,
yeah,
I see what you're
that's
saying.
like the prompt to create this whole story, right? What's the worst thing that could ever happen to him? Well, as a child, he witnesses his father decapitated. His uncle tries to kill him. His mother is taken into slavery, and he's forced to like sail into the open ocean on his own as a child. It literally can't get any worse, right? It's nightmare fuel. But that the second they double down on that, which is after he's an adult, they still play with that question, like, what's the worst thing that could ever happen to Amleth? Learning he like pledges his entire existence to avenging this nightmare fueled event, and then he learns that his mother was the one behind it all, and it was all a lie. That then becomes the worst thing that could ever happen to Amleth. So it's that nightmare fuel is a great way. It's a great exercise to just, come up with scenarios that are ripe with drama and conflict and show your character like at their worst, like growing and forced to grow and change based on this nightmare fuel. But then there's a second part of it that I think works really well too, which is to ask yourself, how could the worst thing that ever happened to my character end up being the best thing that ever happened to my character? And brainstorm what the answer to that question is, and that gives you sort of an extra layer of depth to this nightmare fuel. And I think this one answers it well, right? He finds the love of his life, Olga, and they conceive a child. Therefore, his bloodline gets to live on. None of that would have happened if all of that nightmare fuel, all of his worst nightmares, if he didn't experience all of those worst nightmares, then the best thing that would ever happen to him wouldn't have happened. So, those two questions, what's the worst thing that ever happened to my character? Force them to experience that. Second one, how could the worst thing that ever happened to my character end up being the best thing that ever happened to my character? Try some brainstorming on that. It's going to end up giving you with good stuff for conflict and drama and growth and change. And it also reminded me, I don't think I've ever brought this up. Have you guys ever heard of Chris McQuarrie's main 2 story prompts? Have you heard of that? Have we talked about that before?
No.
Okay, he has a simple equation.
Possible Fallout episode. But
we did. Maybe it's on there. Yeah. He tweeted this once, and I took a screen cap of it. So, I always have it in one of my folders for prompts. He said, at its most basic, he uses 2 prompts to create story, and that is, step 1, take that which is most precious to your character away, whatever that means for your story. Step 2, throw them into a situation they are wholly unprepared for. He claims that those 2 prompts will get you to any story you want. And I think this is a good example, sort of all those sequences kind of reset that, right? He has to put himself into slavery, right? So they're taking his freedom away, right? He's no longer part of a tribe of people that are kicking ass. He's a slave, and he's in a situation that he's wholly unprepared for, right? He has to be like a spy, basically, undercover. And each sequence kind of uses that in its own new way, right? He finds out his mother is behind it all. Well, that which was most precious to him is taken away again. Right. And now he's in a situation he's wholly unprepared for, which is what do I do with that information? Do I kill my mother? Those 2 prompts are really a really good way to, come up with ideas that fit your story well. So I was like, this is a perfect time to bring that up.
I feel like that leads right into the tragedy and down endings, right?
This is a tough topic for this movie. Yeah.
And this is something that I think a lot of the movies we do are without, right?
Yeah, I want to know what you guys
have the happy Hollywood ending here,
right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and just to kind of set a baseline, there's a book called The Moral Premise, which I think is a pretty good book, and the way it describes tragedy, and it's kind of the way I follow in my head, is tragedy doesn't necessarily mean happy ending, or it doesn't necessarily, I should say the opposite. It doesn't necessarily mean a down ending either. It could be a happy ending with a tragedy in some ways. There's kind of this weird mixture. But what the tragedy really means is that the hero didn't learn the lesson that was taught, like in the story. So they did an arc. The lesson was there. It was there to stare at. They could have made a choice. They didn't make that choice, and therefore they end in tragedy. That's the way the moral premise defines a tragedy. So in some ways, that can be an uplifting message to an audience because we recognize the mistake they made, and we say we won't do that. We won't end up like them. So it's kind of reaffirming,
a cautionary
in a weird sort of way.
Tale almost. Too.
Cautionary tale. It's like the world worked the way we thought it should, so it's positive in some ways, even though it's negative for the character. The question is, this movie, it gets really muddy. Like, is it a positive ending? Is it a muddy ending? And what is the theme? What is the character arc here? Is there a character arc? What's it trying to say? And it's tricky.
Is it? I get my answer. I think it's at this point it's almost just opinion, right? My answer for is it a positive ending? I would say yes. And that's me taking into account the things we talked about at the beginning. Like, if this is a movie showing the real life morality and perspective of this time period and these characters, what happens to the Northman in the very end of the movie is the best possible outcome for what he wanted. I don't think his own death was actually that much of a concern for him. And I think the movie displays that throughout. Like, his mission is all that matters. His life is not. Right? So hence it is positive. According to those things. Is it positive if my mom watched this movie? No. To her, it would be horrific. It would be sad. But I think according to with all those caveats and in that context, it is a positive thing. According to the character,
the character. Okay, what do you? I mean, I can chime in now, or I can wait to hear Jamie's side. I don't know. What do you want to do? You want me to go, or you want to go, Jamie?
Either way, if you're
okay. So I always dig it. Like okay. So like the go to the classroom scene, I think, is the ritual ceremony with the king and the Willem Dafoe witch, which is, they say to him, the last words are, live in they get him to pledge all this stuff, right? Live in honor, safeguard your family and blood. Should I fall by the enemy's sword, you must avenge me, or forever live in shame. Always live without fear, for your fate is set and you cannot escape it. And then Amleth says, I swear. So my question is, I think the movie wants us to think that is the right way, right? And that is the way, that the lesson that he needs to learn is to come to grips with all of that, that he's being taught. Cause like, that's the whole thing. Like, it's set up that moment. Like the king says to Nicole Kidman, he needs to be taught what it is to be a king and everything. And then we see this scene. So this is the lesson he's learned. But then the movie argues whether his dad was a good king, and they sort of pull the rug out in that Nicole Kidman's like, is Nicole Kidman right? She's treacherous, but is she the one who really knows the truth? So yeah, I don't know. And then the movie keeps bringing up, like, you're gonna have to choose between, what does they say? Okay, so on the boat, when he's deciding whether to go and live with Olga forever or to continue on with his vengeance agenda, he's sort of, the compass is shifting, and we see him, they have this beautiful, like, they have the sex scene and the hot salt baths with the beautiful tranquility and serenity. The movie kind of shows you that there is a reward there for him, like, cinematically, that if he chooses to stay with Olga and not, like, lay down his life for the sword, go and face his uncle, he might have serenity and peace and, prosperity,
family, love, all that stuff.
All those things. They put a face on those stakes, big on the reward, big time.
And you're saying,
right?
And the movie's telling us that he has chosen not to corrupt his fate over all of those good things.
Yeah, so like,
So
you know, and they have a
right?
conversation like, hate is all I've ever known, he says, but I wish I could be free from it. And Olga says, it is for you to choose. Let us find our future together. And so they're sort of doubling down on what they just showed us. And Amleth says, then Amleth starts having, you know, he has the Tree of Kings vision and he sees that she's pregnant and his lineage is going to move on. But that makes him double down on the vengeance agenda. He says, it was prophesied that I must choose between kindness for my kin and hatred for my enemies. I mean, cinematically, that really feels like it's pointing us in a direction of like moral codes here, right? Like that's sort of placing value on either side of those arguments, which is not what you just said, Bob, even though I think what you just said is the ultimate message, right? That in his eyes, he's doing right. So, yeah, he basically says, you will be mother to a king. We cannot escape our fate, and then jumps in the ocean and never sees her again.
You could also argue, like, I totally agree with what you're saying, but you could also argue, like, him accepting his fate is in some way positive. Like, it depends on what the movie's...
That's why, like Jamie, you said it's muddy.
It's muddy. Yeah, no, it's muddy.
My interpretation of this is, and this is where it's not a cheeseburger, right? This is the non-cheeseburger.
Yeah, right.
I think what he's trying to do, and this is just my opinion of it, I think he's trying to he's almost trying to tell us the epic story the way a Viking would tell it to another Viking. But then he's double dealing us from the bottom of the deck to the modern audience. Like, So he's playing it totally straight. Like, this is a victory. My lineage goes on and all this stuff. At the same time, he's kind of winking at us and saying, this is the way, this is the happy ending, right? Wink, wink. I think there's a little bit of there's something
criticism of just history in general, right?
I think he's leaving us. He's kind of being judgmental by not being judgmental, or leaving it to us to judge,
allowing us to judge,
like the old ways.
Code.
The old ways, they were kind of dumbasses. Like, that's kind of the way I come out of it, right?
Well,
it's kind of like, I get that this is the way the Vikings were, and guess what? The Vikings were probably this macho culture they have and stuff like that. It's probably a little dumb, and that's the way I come out of it.
No, that's
interesting.
Yeah,
I guess I read it too. Like, I'm thinking about the pragmatism of my own mind in relation to the time period, where I'm like, yeah, you could stay with her and have a nice little life, but you're only going to live for like another 15 years at most. Then you're going to get some kind of dysentery or infection and die. So might as well go and avenge your parents and live out your destiny that has been given to you by actual, real, supernatural beings.
That's true.
Like, he has been told by literal, like, the gods have basically
in his
said,
perspective, yeah.
And you're gonna like defy God to go basically play house. Like,
yeah, no. So I wanted to read. So there was a thread out there from a Denmark historian on Twitter, and I'll try to paraphrase it so it's not so long. And his name is Tristan S. Rapp, if you want to look this up. And he says it's all about the Northmen. And he says the highest value in Norse society was personal honor, and nothing was more important than avenging his uncle's slights. What Amaleth's uncle inflicted upon him when he killed his father and took his throne was a word called NIO, which means loss of honor. So it was loss of honor. But even more crucially, if Amaleth had failed to avenge his father, it is Amaleth who would be, and he has another word, which is one without honor. So that's what's at stake, honor. And in that time, honor was,
That's what I first said, basically. Though,
yeah,
right?
that's. I'm supporting that the movie is kind of proving that. Like, this guy closes out with saying,
"Oh, sorry, go ahead."
Yeah, this guy's closing out saying what Amaleth manages to do, and what was in fact the various degree of flexibility his Norse culture allowed, was to unify his love for Olga and his duty of revenge. In choosing both, he proved that he was honorable by avoiding the twin cowardice. I mean, it's very that's hard to connect with as a modern audience, but I think it's there.
Yeah, it's not. it's not an ending for us.
Yeah, it's weird.
An ending for the character.
Yeah, Yeah.
It's very odd. And I guess that's where the Terry Rossio thing comes in. Like, you're not going to make money with this.
Yeah, that's my take on it. Is it's like this is
It's
the
so
story that
Viking.
would be told to the Vikings, and the Vikings would be like, "Hell yeah, he got his honor
He
back."
did it. He got his honor back.
And we're all like, but he could have had a life.
A
with
life and a
Olga.
family
Yeah.
and love. Look how
And
beautiful it was when they were together.
Yeah, and then if to us, it's like we have to examine it. Like, okay, this is a pure piece of Viking storytelling.
Yeah.
How do we interpret that in the modern world? What makes sense? What did we learn about the Vikings and this form of storytelling from it? So it's kind of a cold way to view it.
Yeah.
The Vikings were pretty cold, though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the manipulation is taking you intentionally
To that
down
place,
down a false path to us emotionally, because that's the way that story landed with them or something. That's my weird take on it.
No, it's very similar to the Midsommar ending, which is the script makes it very clear that Danny believes that she's coming out of this like the right way, and then it leaves you to ask, like, was everything that happened in the climax the right way or the wrong way? Because we're going to define it through the character's perspective rather than the audience perspective.
Now,
it makes me wonder why I said I went to that first conclusion so quick, though. Like, why?
Well, because you bought into to everything it was trying to do. The authenticity.
I mean, I guess for me too, I was like, I see what he wants,
and that's what matters.
The context of the fantasy to me also cements it.
Mm-hmm.
If it didn't have these fantasy elements in it, I think it would be more muddy. The fantasy elements make it less muddy for me because I'm like. Mm-hmm. The movie's clearly saying
interesting
fate does exist and honor and to reach his honor and
destiny is at play, therefore destiny wants this to happen.
Hey, Olga, I love you, you're awesome, but it doesn't even compare. Like you're but a human. You know, the other side literally calls to me. You know, I got to take my place in Valhalla. Like that's how it is. Like, you know, so from that perspective, she can't win on that choice. But I could see watching this with audiences, and they're like, they want him to like, you know, they wanted him to go and.
I mean, it is the anti
have sex and kids and farm or something. I don't know.
Jamie, I feel like you were going to say something, and then I cut you off. I've been doing that a lot this episode. I'm sorry.
No, the only thing that I was thinking, another moral premise thing is Stanley Williams kind of claims that stories that have a false moral premise, and false moral premise is kind of one like you come out of that just doesn't seem agreeable, like murder is good or something. You know what I mean? If there's something nihilistic like that, if you come out with something false or something that's just kind of says the world sucks, which, you know, I mean, you might believe the world sucks, but the majority of people go to movies and they're not looking for, you know, if the world sucks, why are you at a movie? I mean, what a waste of time. But he kind of says that things with these kind of false notes don't make money. They don't have huge box office appeal. And he couldn't, you know, he even goes on, like people challenge him with it a lot. Like, what about this movie? And he'll usually debate them.
70 million during a pandemic ain't too bad.
It's not too bad. It's not too bad. I guess, though, at the end of the day, I don't think it turns a profit. And again, if you made this movie for $10 million, then it would turn a profit. But it is a good question. It's like something about these kind of movies don't ignite the kind of juggernaut of blockbuster filmmaking, right? I don't know that there's anything valuable to be learned for that.
No, but you know, because I think the moral premise of this movie is vengeance leads to honor,
which
right?
is
like
not our value system.
No,
in the culture world we grew up in,
but it's authentic to the time
to them,
that they're placing this in, and the person they're watching us, you know, they're having us follow. You know, so
it's funny the vibes I get from the movie, and this could just be my own baggage projecting in it. It seems like there's a cycle of violence message here, you know, but that isn't, of course, what's communicated by the story. It's more my judgment against the story is like, oh, this is a perpetuating cycle of violence for some stupid kind of like, it keeps going on and on, where if somebody would just break it, they'd be able to break it.
It's interesting because the king says, his uncle says to him after he kills his mother, you're evil just like your father was, and evil begets evil, which is basically what you're saying.
Well, I was just about to say that, Jimmy. Like,
cut you off. I'm sorry.
No. I'm saying I was about to say it. You didn't cut me off. What I was going to say is something we haven't even mentioned here is that our main character is like, it, you know, we see him pillage an innocent village, not to rhyme. Right. I mean, like, he is party to them burning alive women and children, and he just sits there and watches it.
Even though he says he won't hurt women or children, I mean, you're complicit to it.
He's 100% complicit. He's doing this.
Yeah.
And the men that he strikes down during that raid, they're innocent people. So it is a cycle of violence. I mean, it's the whole culture is to blame for where he is. Why would he think he could have a happy life with all?
That's not.
You know what? I've had enough. Just take me out. I got my honor. I don't want it.
And my bloodline's going to move on.
Right. That's all that matters. But it's totally an indictment of the culture.
And a modern movie, you know, with kind of a non-false ending or whatever, it would somehow have a twist in the end that eventual death of him and everything led to like bad things, as opposed to, and then his lineage went on forever anyway.
Yeah, and it was great.
Great things and kings. But that's definitely, I think, the Viking mindset.
Well, and the Viking mindset too is, I mean, you got to remember too, it's like he goes to Viking, I'm using heaven. He goes to Viking heaven for what he did. You got to remember that too. It's not
at the end.
It has nothing to do with virtue and morality.
So that's the real reward that the movie is trying to show us he's gained.
Dying in battle is the most glorious death one can have, and that's how you get into their version of heaven.
And his father even basically expresses wanting that. Yeah.
That is not how we view our morality whatsoever. Right.
No.
Yeah. That's kind of what I think. I think just like if we had read this story, if we went online and dug up the old legend or something, we'd read it, and the storyteller would have the intent to give us that value, you know, to say, yes, take vengeance and you will go to heaven and live, you know, a great life. And we kind of roll our eyes and go, I'm not sure about that. But that's the way this movie is to me. I think there's a certain purity to the storytelling that
Jamie, you said you were a fan of Beowulf. In the movie, I remember there's a line where Beowulf himself says, like, the world used to be like a bunch of, like, basically saying a bunch of men fighting and warring and conquering, and now the Christians came in and made everybody equal. And you get into heaven for being good, you know. Like there's I'm paraphrasing like horribly, but that is what. And that movie has a different viewpoint than this movie.
It does.
Yeah. It does.
I think that one takes a modern spin.
But the Beowulf character in that movie says that. Like that's how he views it. Like Christianity made everyone equal and made being good and doing good things virtuous. And he's like mad about it.
Right.
Because in his world, that's not what is good. That's not what the point of life is. Yeah. Does this all cover theme? Have we covered it?
Yeah, I think we've knocked it out. Yeah,
I think we have. Right?
It's all circling around that. Yeah.
Yeah. This is a hard one to talk about, guys.
Yeah, because it's good. It's good. It's through the POV of a Viking. Yeah.
It's just such not a cheeseburger.
Yeah.
This is not Spider-Man No Way Home. Okay.
No. But as we've shown, they use a lot of techniques that we see in those movies to great effect. So
having been the only person here that's seen The Lighthouse, I got to tell you, if you think this would alienate you, check out The Lighthouse. I love The Lighthouse, but woo,
good. Yeah, no, that's why I haven't watched it, because I'm not into anti-plot.
I wouldn't recommend it to you.
Yeah,
but I think that's everything, guys.
Yeah.
Jamie, I know you already plugged your book at least 5 times. Do you have anything else you'd like to plug?
No, I don't think so. A comedy of horrors, I guess. Check it out if you want to see a a fun little horror movie. It should be everywhere. You have to pay for it still. You have to rent it for $3 or whatever it is. But go check it out.
It's worth it. You can see
Comedy horrors.
You can see Jamie Nash's movie.
That's right.
Yeah, and then you can message him about all the mistakes he made.
And you could if you spot me in it, you win a free no prize. I'm
going to start using that. You win a free no prize.
That's the old Stanley no prize.
Jimmy, you got anything?
Nothing to plug.
Nothing. I'm going to keep plugging that movie I made, Transformations of the Dr. Jenkins, available for free on Tubi. You can see me play myself and make an ass out of myself. And yeah, why wouldn't you want to do that after listening to me on the show? I do it even more so than I do on the show normally. So, but I think that's everything, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
You have just listened to Writer's Blockbusters, a screenwriting podcast featuring two professionals and another guy. Available only on Thundergrunt.